Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, and welcome to an introduction to 3D printing for modelers. Now, there are a ton of really good 3D printing channels out there on the interwebs, and they offer far more information and far more expertise than I possess. I've only been doing this for 2-ish months, so I'm definitely coming into this new, and I feel like there's maybe some utility in that for the people who are 2 months behind me, because I'm fresh out of the ringer of at least getting far enough up the learning curve to start churning out some useful stuff. So definitely check out other channels for deeper, more in-depth knowledge. I'm just hoping that my experience and what I've kind of overcome and what I thought versus what the reality is might be useful to people, especially coming from a modeling background, and essentially what to expect as you start charting a course into 3D printing. So I thought it might be most useful to start with an exploration of what 3D printing even is, and a general walkthrough of the process and what to expect. So for all intents and purposes, there are two types of 3D printing. There is FDM printing, which is a process that uses filaments, and it basically works similar to any printer you've ever used, except it builds in a Z-axis as opposed to just doing lines on a page. If you've used a Silhouette or similar sort of cutting machine, it's basically the same thing. You have a print head that moves across and moves around, and instead of cutting vinyl or whatever, it lays down a line of filament that creates the build, and so it builds layer by layer by layer as it goes up. The big strength of FDM printing is that you can do much larger volumes. So you can make like helmets and things like that. And I'm sure there are industrial ones that can make like cars at this point. But they have a much larger build volume. The downside is the resolution is not as great, and oh my god, the layer lines. It looks 3D printed, and those layer lines are a bitch to get rid of. So I'm not even going to talk further about FDM printing. I think it's basically pointless to modeling. And let's move into SLA printing. So SLA printing, or stereolithography, is basically kind of the exact opposite of FDM. Instead of printing on a build plate and building up, what happens is you have a machine that has a vat, and you pour the resin into the vat. Underneath that vat is a screen that projects light up through a clear film in the bottom of the vat called a FEP sheet. FEP stands for something something polymer. Basically, it reminds me of like cell phone screen protectors. Big clear sheet kind of thing. So the resin goes into the vat. There's a light under the vat. There's a build plate on top that is on a Z-axis controlled mechanism of some kind. A lot of them use like a corkscrew kind of thing that makes it go up and down. Some of them have two, some of them have one. There's a big print head up top. Print head goes down into the resin, and it gets to a point of whatever your build height is. So I usually do 0.03 or 0.04 millimeters, but you can go finer than that on some machines. It goes down to that height. There's that little thin layer of resin between the build plate and the FEP sheet, and the screen underneath shines light up at a certain pattern. So it could, if you're printing like a circle, it will shine a circle, and it basically makes the UV reactant resin cure just a little bit, and enough. You can actually set the time exposure and all that to control how cured it gets, but it will cure it and solidify it, and then it will stick to the build plate. Then the build plate goes up, lets more resin flow in, goes back down. The screen shoots up, does another exposure, on and on and on and on. Depending on how many layers you have, this process takes forever. So a relatively small thing, like this windscreen frame for a TIE interceptor, takes about half an hour, 45 minutes, depending on your settings. Something bigger, like the solar panel wings of this 1/48 TIE interceptor, these take like a day or more than a day. So you're going to be waiting a while. That is one of the bigger things I've had to get used to. And I'll get to that somewhere down the line of the adjustment of how long it takes. But basically, that's how SLA printers work. They're also called resin printers. They're also called LCD printers. All kinds of different names. Same basic technology. Vat of liquid chemical shit, a UV light source shining up from beneath, and a build plate that goes up and down. That's the main gist. So, how do you go about getting files to print? Well, you can build them in various CAD programs that will export as STLs or OBJ files, whatever. And there are all kinds of them out there. I use Fusion 360. I'm not good at designing and building shit in Fusion 360. I can basically limp along. But if you have CAD experience, you can do some pretty amazing things. The other option is to buy third-party files. And there are all kinds of sources for this on the internet. There are a lot of, especially in like the miniatures and figures category, there are a lot of Patreon accounts that you can sign up to, and as part of the perks of being a member, you get STL file downloads. So you can get all kinds of weird, crazy, orcs and dwarves and, witches and buildings and things like that. There are also various free sites out there. I can't remember the names of all of them, but there's like Thingiverse, Yegi, there's something else out there. There's also Gambody, which is a pay-to-play site, so you're buying the file sets. But they have a really interesting selection of things. That's actually where the TIE Interceptor came from. They also have things like Ed 209. They have the Razor Crest. They have a lot of really great pop culture, movie, sci-fi things that just aren't available in plastic kits. So that's another source. There are also small, essentially what would have in the, 2 years ago been small garage type shop operations of kit makers. So instead of selling resin kits, a lot of them are now just selling STL files. And you can occasionally buy a physical kit, but for the most part, it's STL files, which is great because those resin kits are really, really expensive. So, instead of paying $300 or something, you're paying $60 or $35 or what it might be. So anyway, you then get those STL files, and depending on what you've bought, it could be just one file, it could be like 20 files. You open them up in whatever your slicer software is. I have Frozen printers, Phrozen, and they use Chitubox, I don't even know how the hell to pronounce it. You open that, you open your file, you position it where you want it on the grid for your printer to make sure that it's like, printing within the boundaries and all that. Orient it how you want. If you want to hollow it out, you can hollow it out. You can then add all the different supports, because the thing is, while it's printing, whatever you're printing is hanging literally from the build plate. So it needs to be supported, and if you have, they're called islands, but pieces that start printing outside of the main body, if they're not supported, they're going to stick to that sheet on the bottom, because by that point, the build plate's way up here and there's nothing to stick to. So you have to build in supports to make sure that those islands actually become part of what you're printing, and also to hold the weight of whatever the main file is that you're printing. So that's basically the two reasons for supports. So you get all that done, you save the file, you put it on a USB stick, you shove it in the printer, you hit print. Oh, you also have to pour resin into the vat. That is another important step. If you don't do that, you're not going to get shit. At that point, you hit print, you let it do its thing. I find it best to literally just, hit print, walk away. Take maybe a mental note of about how long it says. Mine always seem to take longer than they say. So it'll say 21 hours, it'll be 27 hours. So hit print, walk away. After, if it's one of those long prints like that, after 3 or 4 hours, come back and check and just make sure that shit is actually like printing and sticking to the build plate. One issue that my printers have had is if I don't build the supports strong enough, Shut up, compressor. Okay, where were we? So one issue that I had early on that took me a while to overcome was prints ripping free of the build supports and sticking to that FEP sheet on the bottom. So you come back and you look and you have, you know, the build plate, the platform, like the base layers of the resin, all these supports hanging down, and then nothing. And then you pour the resin out of the vat and you've got like a little pancake of shit that you have to get out. That's not fun. And for a while I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. So I'm in there with like a plastic scraper trying to get it up. That's a huge pain in the ass. And then I watched some YouTube videos and realized, no, what you actually do is you basically put the FEP sheet on the back of your hand and kind of roll your knuckles around, and they'll pop that resin loose, and then you just pull it out and throw it away. Let it cure first. You know, set it outside in the sun. If you have like a paint roller tray or something like that, that's a great thing to set stuff in. Let it cure, because once it cures, it's inert and you can throw it away. But if you throw it away when it's still like liquidy, it's toxic shit. So yeah, that is basically one thing to watch out for. I had to lower my lift speed down to like around 40 millimeters a minute. I think the stock setting is like 80 or something. So that makes the build time go up as well. Basically, anything that you do to make the print better makes the build time go longer. It's really frustrating. But yeah, it will print over a span of time. When all is said and done and it's finished, it'll pull out of the vat and it'll kind of drip dry, whatever, you know, drip drain for a while, until you can get to it essentially. And you don't have to worry about getting to it right away. This stuff will stay in its state for quite a while. You know, you can even leave resin in a vat over a weekend and be fine, unless you like put your printer outside where there's sunlight. Then you're screwed. But yeah, if you just leave it in, you know, inside in a darkish room, or even with like minimal indoor lighting, no worries. But yeah, basically, once the print is done, you unscrew the build plate. There's like usually a bolt or, you know, some sort of like turdy, twisty knob thing that'll be holding it securely to the top. Unscrew that, pull the build plate off, have a safe area to work in. So, you know, have some sort of covering, you know, silicone mat or something like that is great to lay down. Have a lot of paper towels, gloves, ventilator. I would recommend eye protection just in case, because you are dealing with toxic resin, and sometimes getting it off the build plate can be a bit of an operation. This is another thing I've had to overcome. So sometimes it will stick really, really well. I've never had a moment where I can just literally grab it with my hand and just pop it off. It doesn't happen that way. What I find is useful is taking an X-Acto with like a number 10 blade, so those big curved blades, and just kind of working it very gently along the edges of the base layers of the build supports, which are like big squares essentially. And as those start to come up, take a flat scraper tool, I think it's like basically like a putty knife, and just kind of slide it in there, and then move it side to side a little bit to kind of, you know, lever up the things around it, and soon enough, the thing comes right off. Doesn't always do that. I had to tinker with my base exposure settings quite a bit. That is how long it cures those first layers that you print so that they stick to the build plate. I think I started at like 39 seconds and basically baked the resin onto the build plate to the point that I pretty much had to chisel it off. I'm now down to like 17 seconds, and it seems to be working well. Anyway, once you get the print off of the build plate, you need to process it. Processing it involves basically dunking it in isopropyl alcohol. I actually have a wash and cure station from Elegoo. I think it's called the Elegoo Mercury. And it has like a little magnetic motor in the bottom of it. And if you put it in the wash cycle, you basically put like this big bucket of IPA on it. And the bucket's got a little magnetic propeller thing on the bottom. And there's a little attachment on this tower where you can put a wire basket to hang into the tank. So you put the bucket on there, you put the basket in the bucket, you put your stuff in the basket, put the lid on it, and then you have it do a wash cycle for however long you want. I usually do, I don't know, 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes maybe. And the magnet in the base will spin, and it will make that propeller spin, and you'll get a cool little, you know, whirlpool type thing going on with your IPA, and it will wash your part. The fun thing about this is the IPA gets really dirty really quickly, and when it gets dirty, it loses its effectiveness. So one downside to 3D printing is you go through a significant quantity of IPA. The good news is it's pretty easy to dispose of because IPA flashes off quickly. It has a very fast evaporation rate. So again, as it gets bad, take it outside, pour it into something like a paint roller tray, and just let it bake off. And then the resin that's left over will cure, and then you can throw that away. So disposal's not a huge issue. It's more just, holy shit, the quantities. And what I actually did is I bought a second bucket, so I have like the dirty bucket and the clean bucket. And as the clean bucket gets dirty, a lot slower because it's like the second wash and most stuff's already rinsed off. But as it gets dirty, I pour out some of the dirty bucket to let it evaporate, and then I replace what I poured out with the slightly dirty stuff from the clean bucket, and then I top off the clean bucket. So it's like a nice little process. Now, if I was really anal about it, I think 3 buckets would make more sense, but whatever, 2's fine. From there, I usually let the thing sit for a little while, and then I'll come back to it after about a half hour after the IPA's had a chance to essentially cook off. That's when I remove all the supports, and depending on the sizing of the supports, that can be a bit of an operation. Let's see what I've got around here that shows it off. Yeah, here we go. So there are basically, in Shiny Box, there are 3 support levels. There's light, medium, and heavy. And you can define beyond that, like, how big is the contact point? How deep does it go? What's the density of it? Like, all of these different factors. Light supports are great because they leave basically no trace. They pop off and you don't even know they were there. Medium and heavy supports, you know they were there. And so you don't want to put them on anywhere that is going to be like really exposed. That's easy on figures because you can put it on the bottom of the feet. You can put it like up underneath tunics and things like that. Basically on the bottom of the, you know, on like the horizontal downward facing portions of the figure, and you're fine. A little bit harder on something like a TIE Interceptor cockpit ball because it's a ball. It's round. Where do you put stuff? Because no matter where you put it, you're going to see it. Well, you put it in the place you're least likely to see it, which is the bottom. And, I mean, as you can see, it is bumpy and just tore up to hell. And, yeah, not cool. Not cool at all. So, that's something you have to think about. To remove these things, you can just rip them off. I don't mind ripping off the light ones because, again, they leave no trace. But I try to go in and use sprue cutters to cut off the medium and heavies as needed. And on something where you have, you know, when you first get off the build plate and you have all these, like, you know, probably a good 100 or more supports, I find it useful to get sprue cutters and kind of like cut your way in. And then as you start denuding the thing of the supports, you can basically just kind of like twist and pull and it'll come off. Once all the supports are removed, you have the final step, which is curing. So curing basically involves hitting it with UV light to make it go that final distance to become that safe, inert stuff you can fuck with. And this depends on the part and the thickness of the part and all that kind of a thing. I usually do about 3 to 5 minutes in the curing station, and basically with that you hit a button, you put a little turntable on that same magnet, you tell it it's doing light instead of the IPA bath, or else it'll spin really fast and throw your part against the cover, which is always fun. I've only done that like 5 times. Anyway, it'll spin slowly and there are UV lights in there to basically bake it into a cured state. You can also set it outside in the sun if that's practical. Then you get your 3D printed thing and you can do with it what you will. One other aspect that I've encountered is hollowing parts. Hollowing parts uses less resin, and it also reduces suction forces that can pull your part off of the supports and stick it to the FEP sheet. So this is an example where I actually did hollow the part, and you can see I put drain holes basically along the this inner hexagon thing here And what they do is they let the liquid resin that's inside this drain out. Didn't work very well on this. And I had another one where it like kept bubbling out on me afterwards. And so if you do put in drain holes and you do hollow things, be sure to give the part time to drain. And if you can, put in the largest drain holes possible, because that way it'll drain better and you won't have that stupid leak bullshit going on that can honestly ruin a print if you go to cure it and it starts leaking out, which I have had happen. So that is basically the process that you're looking at for printing 3D parts. It's definitely an involved process. It takes a long time, at least the printing part does. The cleanup doesn't honestly take all that long. And so be prepared for patience. This is not going to replace injection molded kits anytime soon. The level of work involved, the level of dialing in settings, climbing the learning curve mountain, dealing with inconsistencies, and I mean even things like resin shrinkage or parts fit, just it's honestly a lot of times anybody's guess. And there have been times where I've had to print the same part multiple times at slightly different scales just to make sure that it would fit with another part. So this is definitely not for the faint of heart, and it's not for people who want a quick fix. It takes learning, it takes going through some pain, but when you come out the other side, you get things like a 1/48 scale tie interceptor, which is not really readily available in kit form. And if I wanted to, I could scale this thing up to 1/32 scale, which is definitely not available. I can make Ed 209, I can make a U-wing, I can make, you know, all kinds of stuff that just does not exist in plastic form, or honestly even in resin form. Captain America from Endgame. Cool, I could do that. The Witch King from Return of the King. I could do that. Lots of different things that you can do. And so the main appeal of a 3D printer is not cost savings. It's not ease. It's not better fit either, because again, controlling for shrinkage and things like that, like that's a chore. The appeal is being able to create things that just don't exist otherwise, and likely won't for the foreseeable future. So if that still sounds appealing to you, go ahead and keep watching the next videos, and I'll get into some of the some more details, some more nuances, some of the questions that people have, and the maybe misconceptions that are out there. If not, then hey, cool, don't worry about 3D printing. So thanks for watching, and I will be back with more videos on this subject in the near future. Catch you later.